What is up, all of you beautiful people, and welcome back to the channel. And once again, I am joined by my buddy Nick, who you can follow on Twitter at CBB Nick. And like we've been kind of doing, like we did at least for the first round, and just kind of get a primer for the NCAA tournament as a whole, we're just going to talk about what's been going on and the craziness that is March Madness. And a lot of upsets that didn't come to fruition, a lot of upsets that did come to fruition. We were, I would say, like a split 50-50 as far as kind of our predictions go. And then from there, let's just talk about the Sweet 16 and kind of play out the rest of the board here. But as we kind of go back to that first round, I mean, you have to lead off with Fairleigh Dickinson. I
Of
mean,
course.
not only was that not on our radar as an upset in round one, we didn't even know who'd be playing Purdue, period, because obviously they were in the playing game with Texas Southern, and I was on Texas Southern in that game. Um,
Same.
Fairleigh Dickinson didn't even win the NAC. That just kind of blows my mind. Is that one, Merrimack got screwed. I don't know if
hmm
Merrimack obviously could have beat Purdue, but um, like we kind of talked about in our primer briefly, Dimitri Roberts became a household name, and I mean that's a guy who, yeah, he's very small, but he has the lightning quicks and the speed that had the ability to make him a household name, and it came to fruition. Nick, just where were you when were watching that? Did you hop on at any point, like on the money line, or like how did you kind of take in that game at all?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we were in the craziness of the first round, so I had three screens of a bunch of games going on, and it was kind of off my radar for the most part because I didn't bet it, and I figured Purdue wouldn't have any trouble. And then as it got deeper and deeper into the game, I'm like, oh shit, I gotta put this one on. And I mean, while I was watching it with my buddies, like, yeah, I mean, I couldn't say I was surprised that Purdue lost, but I just didn't expect it to come to FDU. I mean, obviously they're opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of height on the team. I think Purdue's ranked number one in the country in terms of the height of their team, and FDU is dead last in the country. So for Purdue to drop that game is really embarrassing. I don't know how. Like obviously Virginia, we saw it happen a couple years ago, but I feel like this one is even worse.
Absolutely is a lot worse. I mean, you're going up against the smallest team in all Division One out of 363 teams. You got a dude who's 7'4", and it just felt like down the stretch they were going away from him. Yeah, it's double possession game, but you have 5 minutes left or so. I mean, like, how are you not getting him a touch every single possession and just letting him tower over, the defender on him or the two defenders on him? They're gonna have to hack. There's no real way to defend that. And again, the knocks on Matt Painter being a questionably good tournament coach are once again raised. And when it keeps getting raised with the same kind of coaches, talking about like Fran McCaffrey, Matt Painter, and you can go on Penny Hardaway, for example, like so many guys where we've already seen those dudes flop. Even Coach Calipari, who obviously is a legend of the sport. He's accomplished a lot. Recency, though, as far as just what have you done for me lately, the whole X's and O's thing has been brought into question. Now you're mixing NIL and the transfer portal in to the old sort of way that they were going about it, where they were literally just collecting all the 5 stars every single year. Now there's a little bit more of a competitive balance, and they've just kind of faded. They're not really a national title contending feeling type of team anymore. Or at least it doesn't feel like that. I mean, I was obviously on Kansas State in this last round, but what do you make of all this sort of, the trends that we kind of assumed would be continuing in this tournament when we look at a certain team and say, oh yeah, we're going to fade them, and then it comes to fruition? Do you think that's fair in a one-off type of tournament atmosphere, or do you think that it's just kind of the luck of the draw sort of thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you said, you've pointed out all these guys with Calipari and Painter, and it's like they're awesome during the regular season, but then when it comes to March, it seems like they fade out very quickly. And I mean, we could say the same thing about Barnes at Tennessee. Obviously, they're still in it and had that good win versus Duke. So I don't know. Maybe he breaks the curse this year. We'll see how far they get. But yeah, it's always something that I take into account. At least with the Big Ten guys, is like, am I going to really trust these guys the more the rounds go? Because obviously in the first round we trust them because they're usually paired up against a much weaker opponent. But I mean, now even are we able to trust them in the first round? So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird place we're in with college basketball with those guys because they are legends, but they just can't get it done in March.
Yeah, and you look at kind of who is remaining right now as far as just the coaches, not just the programs, but the coaches. You know, you have a Mick Cronin versus Mark Few matchup, two good coaches, I would say.
Yep.
Then you look at, Eric Musselman versus Bobby Hurley. I think there's a question about Bobby Hurley, but if this
Mhm.
tournament could put it to bed, and obviously he's still pretty early on in his stint at UConn, relatively speaking, at least. And
Yep.
then you go up the list and you have obviously Rodney Terry for the interim head coach, which would have been Chris Beard. And then, you're going up against Miller with Xavier in there. So you got two good coaches again there. And then Larinaga versus Sampson. And then you have Jerome Tang versus Tom Izzo. I mean, and the list goes on and on. I mean, then you have a little bunch of questions on the more so on the top side of the bracket than I expected, actually. But still, obviously, you got Dutcher, Nate Oates, a lot of note and McDermott and a lot of notable names. And I think when it does come down to tournament play and just winning a one-off type of game, there are certain coaches that flop less than others, who make runs more than others, and have a good balance as far as a healthy program with a lot of support, and they bring in enough talent to make those runs. But man, I do think that when you look at the coaches, it definitely matters, which is why I think this tournament, or at least the remaining teams in the Sweet 16, are a lot of fun. But let's go back to round one really fast. Take me through just three games that you were watching that were just the most intriguing or played out the most entertaining from a viewership perspective for you.
Yeah, I think one that you have to put up there is Furman, Virginia. We have Kihei Clark, who's a veteran guy. He's always been around. He's always there. It feels like he's been at Virginia for 10 years, but uh, just a blunder, I guess you could say. It's just super uncharacteristic of what he would do, and blows the game. And Furman hits a walk-off three and wins the game and moves on. I mean, I think we talked about it. I think we knew Furman could make it close, but again, just the ending of it is what made it crazy, because it just shouldn't have happened. If you give me Virginia like 10 out of 10 times in that scenario, I'd be like, oh, Virginia closes it out. They're not going to blunder it like that. But obviously, yeah, we saw what happened. So that would be definitely one for sure. What about one for you?
So Furman was definitely one, obviously. I mean, Virginia was up double digits in the second half, like late in the second half. And then
Yep.
it just kind of started dwindling. They missed free throws. Furman was making threes. They were making their free throws. And all of a sudden it got really close. And then obviously, yeah, the Kihei Clark. Oh my goodness. That was the most shocking or jarring thing. I have to go to Princeton, Arizona, because not only did you and I call this upset as potentially being the St. Peter's, little did we know that it was going to be topped the very next day. Not
Right.
not usually a 15 seed pulling an upset that gets topped immediately, but yeah, we were both on Princeton. I actually bet their money line. I believe maybe you did as well. I honestly I can't remember, but we loved Princeton in that one because one, Arizona has runs their offense through three bigs, so they always have a big on the floor. They're always constantly running their action off of him, or one of the two, or one of the three. And then Princeton is just kind of a well put together team who we saw play really competitive in the Ivy League and go on a really nice little run in the late stretch of the season as well. And they can make their shots. They don't turn the ball over a whole lot. They play good defense, and that's shown up now in two different rounds where not only did they beat Arizona in convincing fashion, they also beat Missouri down to a pulp by 15. And we know
Yeah.
that Missouri can be volatile, and we talked about that in the round one matchup. But man, that was
That was a
yeah,
Yeah, it was a
lay
beatdown.
go.
It was brutal. I was on Missouri. I really thought that was where Princeton runs ends, but they shoved it to me. That was like Missouri like didn't even have a chance in that game. Like Princeton was a no doubt. They started off hot and never took their foot off the gas. That was a blowout.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that speaks to with Missouri specifically, and we might talk about with some of these Sweet 16 teams, is that when you are reliant on the jump shot, whether and just making shots period and being efficient from the floor, and you're gonna push a high pace, or fast pace rather, it's going to be tough to string that along for one, two, three games in tournament play back to back to back, and you have to, or else you're done, right?
Yep.
That's why we see sometimes Iowa, they look great in round one, they're making their shots, or they look great during a Big Ten tournament run stretch, And then all of a sudden, they just have that one off game. And guess what? That one off game is your last. And I think we saw that also with Furman in round two. They were hitting
Mhm.
their shots in round one against a good defensive team in Virginia. But in round two, they go up against another good defensive team and they just lay an absolute dud. And I was on San Diego State in that Furman game for that reason. And
Yep.
I think when let's actually kind of so we're just gonna be free flowing, yo. I don't have a whole lot of structure here to be honest with you, and honestly, I just kind of like shooting the shit and talking with my
Yep.
buddy Nick here.
Yep.
Um, when you look at a team like Creighton, I feel like that is a team that I would be worried about trusting as far as putting together three good games from the floor in a row. Now, they have a little bit more balance than most years. A lot of the past Creighton teams we've seen have been heavily reliant on the jump shot and shooting efficiently from the floor. This one feels
Mhm.
a little bit better, but talk me through Creighton there, because obviously they just pulled off an NC State win and a Baylor win, and now they're going up against the Cinderella in Princeton.
Yeah, like you said, how reliant are we going to be, or how reliant are they going to be on hitting those shots? And also in that Baylor game, an impressive thing that I saw someone pointed out on Twitter, they had 22 free throws in that game and made all 22. They were 100% from the line. So that was a huge factor in the game. If they can get to the line that often and make even if they were to make 90% like that's going to be a huge bump for them. But like you said, they were 11 for 24 from three that game. Nemhard had 30 points. I don't know if he can keep that type of performance up. Obviously, he's a great player, but we'll see. I think the spread in that game is really high. It makes me want to lean towards Princeton's sides because their offense is definitely good. We've seen it, and they obviously are capable of winning not one but two games in March. So I lean towards Princeton in that game just because I don't know how hot Creighton can stay, and I do trust Princeton's offense. But yeah, I mean we'll see in a couple days.
Yeah, and we're getting double digit cushion there as well.
Right,
If
exactly.
if you are kind of worried about Princeton's or not Princeton's volatility, but Creighton's volatility, and you think that maybe they only score in the low 70s or mid 70s, that means Princeton really just has to score somewhere in the 60s to cover that spread. I mean, that's not too improbable for sure. And let's actually just go jump right into Sweet 16 and we can kind of recover or talk about, past games that those teams have played. And let's lead off in that South region where we have Alabama going up against San Diego State. If you guys have been following the channel and some of our future bets, you know that obviously we have a lot of stock in San Diego State. Not only do we have them making the Sweet 16, we also have a half unit on them at plus 590 to make the Elite Eight. So a big game against Alabama here, but take me through it. Who do you think wins this? And as far as a point spread goes, let me pull it up here.
So that's 7.5, minus 7.5 for Bama.
Minus 7.5 for Bama. So tell me, just what are your thoughts initially when you look at that matchup there?
Yeah, right off the rip, without deep diving into too many things, I feel like it's a lot of points for San Diego State to be catching for a defense that is as good as San Diego State has, and they're capable of putting up mid 70 point games as well. So, I mean, I think if their guards are going to be able to score, I mean, we saw Trammell get off to a slow start versus Furman, but then came back in the second half and had I think like 12, 13 points. And obviously we have Bradley and Butler. These guys are experienced, they're veterans. I feel like they're going to be able to keep up with Bama. It's really what Brandon Miller are we going to get to? Obviously, we saw in the first round he didn't contribute any points, and Bama still dropped 96. Obviously, versus Corpus Christi, who is not on the same level as San Diego State, but that offense can click even without the best player scoring any points. But I don't know if they're going to be able to drop that amount of points on San Diego State. So I lean with the Aztecs. I think Bama wins the game, but I think San Diego State can keep it close.
Yeah, I'm actually a believer that this is the matchup I wanted to potentially see in my bracket, which is why I took them to make the Elite Eight. Because essentially, what we're getting now, and I had faith that I think San Diego State could have beat Charleston, obviously, and then I also thought they could match up well with whoever came out of Furman, Virginia. And so I wanted a money line sort of dog, and plus 280 is the current just straight up line if you were to bet that game individually. So plus 590 is obviously a really good disparity there. And the reason I love this matchup is because when people think about San Diego State, I think what they immediately think when they just kind of look at the base level numbers is this is a good defensive team, right? This is another Virginia. I mean, Alabama, obviously a high powered offense. And we just kind of saw, I think, a very similar style of matchup in Kansas, Arkansas, to this game. And I think what people are underrating with San Diego State is they do have the guards this year. They have a host of them, not only that were, program grown from the ground up like a Matt Bradley, but Darian Trammell, I think, was one of the best additions of the entire offseason as far as the transfer portal goes from Seattle. And initially, I think he had to take a step back in the beginning part of the season because at Seattle, he was launching ridiculous volume that would not be sustainable in this offense. And now he's kind of almost taken up. Now I don't want to call it a six-man role, but it's almost like he's fine being subbed out for stretches just to kind of get that energy back. And he's a weapon when he comes off the bench immediately. He's a spark plug. I mean, he's really fast. He can shoot the ball well. I think Bama's in trouble, and I actually think Bama loses this game. Um, Again, kind of like we talked about in our primer for the NCAA tournament. Alabama's a team that kind of wanted to fade coming in here. I actually have bet on them now, at least once. I bet on them last game out against Maryland at -9, which obviously hit. But I love the San Diego State team, and I love their mold, and I do think they pick up that win there. Um, but let's go down one more peg here to a team we've already kind of touched on, Creighton, and they're obviously going up against Princeton. We talked about how, probably want to take the points there. If you do like the angle on maybe Creighton Lane, somewhat of a dud. Tell me, Nick. So this is what's really interesting. Obviously, Princeton is the longest odds underdog, as far as like futures go with the NCAA tournament right now. Do you see any value in placing anything on Houston at all to make, say, like a Final Four? I mean, plus 4,000 does seem pretty crazy
For Houston to make the Final Four?
for Princeton.
Oh, Princeton to make the Final Four. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely capable. Like I think even if Creighton doesn't even lay a dud, like I'm not super relying on them to just have a bad game and Princeton take advantage of it. I think Creighton can just play even just their average style, but Princeton can still capitalize on that. I mean, we saw Langborg drop 22 points in their last matchup versus Missouri. I mean, if he gets hot, and Aloko, I think is his name, if they both get hot from three, like this team will put up points on you real quick. So I do like Princeton, definitely plus the 10. It's worth a sprinkle on the money line. We've seen it. I mean, if you catch momentum like this, it's hard to stop a team that's shooting really well and has momentum on their side, especially when everyone's I mean, maybe now more people are paying attention to them, but pretty much writing them off, like that obviously fuels a lot of these teams. We've seen it a couple times, even just in this tournament. So, I mean, it's definitely value at plus 4,000. So yeah, I can see it happening.
I'm right there with you. I've already actually kind of sprinkled a little bit on a Princeton future just for the pure value standpoint, because I don't think Creighton is like an unbeatable team. And again, I just kind of laid out my philosophy as far as can you string along 3 straight games of good offensive jump shooting efficiency? Maybe. I do think Creighton's loaded with talent, but all I really have to do is catch an off game from Creighton and then maybe get a more favorable matchup, I should say, with San Diego State, where Princeton can play those kind of lower scored type of games. And who knows? I mean, like, what would you think a theoretical Princeton San Diego State line would open up at? Maybe like 6.5, 7.5, 8.5 in that range. That's where I would be kind of thinking.
Yeah, I was just I think 8.5 would probably be too high, but I would probably say around like 6.5 ish, I guess.
Yeah, so if you're talking about that, a theoretical money line spot in that situation would be plus 210, plus 230, and
Right.
you'd be holding a ticket for plus 4,000 in that
Right,
theoretical
exactly.
matchup. I highly recommend, don't throw a whole lot, don't throw like a whole unit on it. It's not what I'm saying, but
Right.
you might, if you sprinkle it, man, you might be walking away with like 10 units if you really play those cards right. But let's go down here to another really intriguing matchup. And I think this is one of the ones that, as far as my Twitter DMs go and notifications go, I'm definitely getting the most questions about this one so far in the early parts of this week. And that is FAU going up against Tennessee. Um, I think the reason why a lot of people are starting to ask questions is because coming into the tournament, I think Louisiana was a popular upset pick over Tennessee in round 1.
Hmm.
Then people faded Tennessee in round 2, and they smoked Duke. I'm sorry, Nick. I didn't mean to bring
That's,
up old wounds.
they did. That was a brutal game that they beat the shit out of us. So
Yeah, it felt like Duke maybe was closing in the gap when it was like a 7 point deficit, and then it just kept expanding.
Yep.
And obviously now you have this matchup of FAU Tennessee, and when you look at FAU, very few people, as far as an 8-9 matchup, were taking FAU to advance past Memphis. Then
Mhm.
obviously they make that miracle comeback. Then they draw Fairleigh Dickinson. Now this is a Sweet 16 matchup with Dusty May and Rick Barnes and their squads going up against each other. Take me through this one and how you kind of see this one playing out here.
Yeah, this is a tough one too because I do like Tennessee to move on. I think they're just a really tough team. We saw it with Duke, whether they want to play rugby or just tough defense. They're a tough team to score on. But FAU, we saw them too have mounted a comeback and they're gifted offensively as well. We saw them all year be able to score. So this is a tough one for me too. I'm not surprised that this is one a lot of people are asking for. It's really tough. I lean Tennessee. I think they can. I think Rick Barnes maybe breaks curse this year, and they move on to the Elite Eight. But again, it's really tough. I'd love to hear what you think on it.
I think the perception is people see a close line or a tight line like a -5,
Hmm.
and they want to jump on Tennessee, especially after Tennessee just blew the doors off Duke, right? And my question is, when do we see Makai Ziegler's absence actually make a difference? And I do think FAU, obviously one of the deepest teams in this tournament. They have the guards to compete here. I think we have a potential first overtime potential type of game here, and
Hmm.
you're getting multiple possessions. I honestly think FAU wins this thing outright. And when I'm just kind of looking down the lines, I
Hmm.
mean, the only tight lines you're really seeing are those ones where you have the 2-3 seeds going up against each other in Xavier, Texas, and Gonzaga, UCLA. And then you have a somewhat tight line. Actually, there's multiple tight lines this week, should I say? But I do think this line is very telling, just given like recent events. And I think people are writing this FAU team off. We talked about it in our primer. They were going up against Memphis, but this FAU team had the feel of a 6 or a 7 seed entering into this
Right.
tournament. And so people see that 9 seed on the line and they're thinking they know the caliber of team that this is. And people don't realize that the committee just fucked up. And honestly, Tennessee, I think, is more of a 5 seed, in my opinion, as far as just a straight talent perspective. Now, they're playing really well. They were making timely jumpers against Duke and timely buckets down the stretch. But you saw in that first round match against Louisiana, they were up, I think, maybe 20 points. And that ends as a 3 point ball game. And that just speaks to the scoring droughts this Tennessee team goes on. As you kind of go down the wire here, teams that are this good, like FAU, I think are going to make them pay.
Yeah, and that offensive performance for Louisiana, like you said, I mean, they only put 58 points on mediocre to like pretty bad defense in Louisiana Lafayette. So if they have droughts like that and they're not able to score, FE will definitely take advantage of that.
Absolutely agree. And let's scroll down here a little bit more. We got Kansas State, Michigan State. Okay, this is my favorite game. Well,
Yes, this game is
also,
awesome.
yes. And once again, if you've been following the futures on this channel, we are very invested in Michigan State. Not only do we have Elite Eight plus 630, we have them to win the East region at plus 1500 and the whole damn thing at plus 7,000. I mean, interesting ball game here. Really interesting. It's what's more telling to me is that Michigan State opened up as a -1 favorite. Now it's
Mhm.
jumped up to -2. What are your thoughts initially when you look at this really, really fun matchup?
Yeah, this is really tough. This is a really good game with two really good teams that I like betting on. So it's tough. I think I touched on it this weekend. I think we hopped into Twitter Spaces and we talked about Kentucky, Kansas State, and what I think I said was the most pivotal point of this game is besides maybe trying to limit Sheboy's rebounds, which is almost impossible. But Kansas State is really bad with the ball. They've been bad with the ball all year and turned it over a ton. They only had 8 turnovers versus Kentucky, and it was very telling. They won the game. They won by 6 points, but I mean Kentucky was the favorite in this spot, and they were able to limit the turnovers. I mean Noel went like unconscious. They couldn't make a three the entire game. They were like 0 for 12 at some point, and then right when it mattered, they hit like 3 in a row in the most clutch time. But if we take it into Michigan State, who we've talked about, they're a decent 3-point shooting team. They didn't have a good performance last game. But if Michigan State's 3-point defense, which I think is pretty good, is able to kind of lower Kansas State's average from three and maybe force them to shoot like they did versus Kentucky, Michigan State's able to stay in this game. And Michigan State, again, we saw them. I love that team. I know I'm a Duke guy, but when I saw Izzo get fired up on the sideline and was just pumping his fist and was screaming, I love that Michigan State energy. Like I love seeing Izzo and his team just fucking man up and get the job done. And that beginning of that game versus Marquette was awesome. I thought they were going to run Marquette out. Obviously, they made it a bit of a closer game towards the end, but yeah, I really want to lean with Michigan State. The way they're playing and that energy that they have, they're a really well-rounded team. I do hate rooting for Joey Hauser, but when I need him to hit a three, if I'm on him, I'll root for him. But again, this is going to be, I think, the best game this week.
Absolutely agree. And I think the winner of this game is going to be in the national title. I really do believe that. And I've been saying it for months now, months. This Michigan State team is built to make a Final Four. They are built to compete for a national title. Why wouldn't you, if you're just looking on the surface, not want to have a Tyson Walker in your corner when you're a one-off, you need to win this game to advance type of game. You want a Tyson Walker, you want an AJ Hogard, you want a Joey Hauser who is going to be a reliable spot up shooter. Malik Hall is an absolute stud off the bench, somehow still coming off the bench for them. And Matty Sissoko, I mean, he gets for some reason disrespected a lot. He's not the most like the greatest defensive big man, obviously not an elite scorer, but what he is a high effort guy and really lengthy and athletic, and he just always is trying. He's like taking shots to his chin, and this is coming from an Iowa fan. Like growing up, I hated Michigan State. They drove me crazy because every single time we go to East Lansing, whether it was for football or basketball or whatever sport, I felt like we were gonna lose. That was just the one team growing up that drove me crazy. But now, as I'm like sitting back here in an objective chair, and obviously I don't have any Iowa stock anymore with them gone, I think Michigan State's my favorite team left in this tournament. I think, at least on this side of the bracket, should I say. And I love Michigan State to advance here. I really do think they're going to get it done. Speaking a little bit biasly because I am holding a ticket that I can't really do anything with until it actually cashes, but I still love this team. And I love Kansas State as well, but like you kind of said, Marquise Noel had to play an unconscious game for them to advance. And they were down. They were struggling for long stretches during that Kentucky game, and they responded well. But I do think eventually that sort of thing has to run out when you are so reliant on that one guy. And Keontae Johnson just hasn't really stepped up all that much in this tournament so far.
Yeah, he kind of no-showed in that game, and I thought he was going to have a pretty decent performance, at least offensively. I love Keontae Johnson. I love their story. I love Kansas State's story, and I'm rooting for him, but he just really didn't show up versus Kentucky when I thought he would. So I don't know. Maybe he has a bounce back game, but I think if Michigan State's defense is super capable of shutting him down like Kentucky did.
But yeah, as we kind of continue on here, we're going to be eyeing this Houston Miami game. Okay, so I feel like all these games are really fun in their own unique way, especially
Mhm.
this one because Houston felt like they were on the ropes against Auburn despite the 17-point win. I mean, Auburn, if you watch this game and we were on it, um, holy hell, they cannot make free throws to save their life. And that drove me to the brink. I mean, they had a 10-point halftime lead and it fell apart. I mean, they got in the bonus so early on and they just couldn't make a single free throw to save their lives. But Miami, a different matchup that Houston has not seen even remotely so far, mainly
Mhm.
because they might have the best backcourt in the entire tournament. I mean, when you're just looking at Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong, tell me, what are your thoughts on this matchup with Houston and Miami here?
I have already locked in Miami plus 7.5. I think, like you said, Houston hasn't seen a backcourt like this before. And my favorite part about this team is like even versus Drake, they struggled versus Drake. They were really on the ropes, and I thought they could potentially get a first round exit. But then we saw guys like you said, Nigel Pack step up. I think the return of Amir, while he's not going to be the leading scorer every game, that guy goes after every rebound. He's trying every possession, and he's fighting for everything. So while Wong and Miller are the go-to guys for scoring, I think Amir brings a lot of heart and fight into this team, and I love that he's back. But yeah, I mean, Wong had a bad performance against Drake and then bounced back against Indiana and dropped 27 points on him. So this is a backcourt that I really trust. What I fear a little bit is their defense. Their defense is not that good, and Houston can take advantage of it. But we've seen Houston's offense also look lost. When the first round at First Northern Kentucky, they kind of didn't know how to run their offense really for a bit there. Obviously, they get the job done and move on. But I think if they run into a slump like that, Miami on the other side of the court is going to be able to score if they can get open looks. But yeah, I mean, I love this Miami team. I've kind of been backing them all year. So I think 7.5 is a lot of points for them to catch. So as soon as that opened, I bet it. I like Miami.
And what really concerns me about this line, and it also kind of goes back to what we talked about with Creighton, with Iowa, with teams that rely on a lot of heavy jump shooting efficiency. Miami is definitely in that mold. Now, I love what they have in place. Norchad Amir has been great. Obviously, Nigel Pack is great. Isaiah Wong is great. Miller is great. They have a really formidable, and obviously, I love Larinaga as well. I think he's one of the easily a top 10 coach in college football, college basketball, and people don't give him the publicity I think he deserves.
I agree.
The question I have, and it really just kind of stems around where this line opened up. Everybody saw Miami's performance against Indiana. Most of the general public knows about their backcourt, Miami's backcourt, that is. And listen, I think after some of these upsets over one seeds over this past weekend, people are looking for that next one. But and 7 points obviously is a lot of possessions. I mean, that's more than two possessions right there that you're catching. And I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are going to be jumping on that Miami number, but this could be a game where we do see a Miami dud, and it wouldn't be totally shocking because we've already kind of seen it against Drake. If Drake actually would have shot, you know, or made a bucket in the last 5 minutes of that game, or more than two, they were done. I mean, Miami was on the ropes, and they give it to them. They had the ability to fight out of that and through a horrible shooting night and get a win, but against Houston, which I feel like is a very souped up version of Drake, I don't know. I'm going to take Houston to advance here. As far as an actual bet on this game, yet to be determined. This might be one of the games I just don't bet.
Mhm.
That could be easily an angle I take, but I'm going to go Houston to advance there just because I am a bit concerned about Miami's offensive output and being a little bit lackadaisical on defense against a team like Houston. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the public being all over them, I mean, you nailed it. There's 85% of the handle and 74% of the bets around Miami. We've seen it fall down to 7 from 7.5 already. So I think you're right. I think people saw Houston struggles a bit in the first round. And I mean, if Auburn was able to hit a free throw or do anything on offense, they would have gave Houston an even harder game. But yeah, I don't know. This is also sort of an emotional bet for me too, just because I love his team. I love Isaiah Wong, so I'm a root for him. I think it's capable. They're capable of beating Houston, but again, like you said, if Houston is on and makes Miami pay by forcing them to miss jump shots, Miami could struggle too. So
Yeah, it's going to be a really fun game to watch regardless, just because I do think it's going to be, at least in the first half, high powered, high octane offense. And we are going to see some really nice scoring runs with, impressive ability just because there's so much talent on the court. Um, as we head down to the Xavier Texas matchup. So Xavier, it's interesting, right? Because I feel like nobody was taking them to get upset in the first round, except for me. I was on Kennesaw State money line. It was so close.
dude, they should have had it.
They were up double digits, man, with under 10 minutes to
13
go.
points.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez. And yeah, so Xavier skates by narrowly against Kennesaw State there. Questionable calls at the very end, which might have actually led to an upset. But then in round two, everybody again was taking Pitt. Like it just felt like
Mhm.
an emotional response to not only watching Pitt demolish Iowa State and come out of that play-in game, and also seeing Xavier potentially almost lose to Kennesaw State, but so many people were on Pitt there. And then Xavier just kind of says, listen, we're the much better team. We're going to absolutely flatline you here. And that's what they did. And now we have a matchup between Texas and Xavier. And I feel like Texas is kind of coasted. I mean, that last game against Penn State was a 5 point game. 5 point. I had a bet on Texas minus 5.5. And if Seth
Bro.
Lundy doesn't hit a 4 point play, I'm not worried about that game at all. Um, but I do think Texas has coasted for the most part against both Colgate and Penn State. So tell me, with this matchup here, who are you liking? Because I do think it's one of the more intriguing ones on the board this weekend.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me too. I haven't dove into it too deep or have a super strong leaning on either side. I do like this Texas team, but again, do we credit their defense on Penn State in the last round for making them shoot 8 for 28 from three after like an unconscious performance, or was it just Penn State having an off night from round one versus A&M? Because if Penn State hits 11 of those 28 threes they took, then they win the game. So. Yeah, it's really tough. I think Xavier's offense, like we saw, high powered. They dropped 84 on Pitt, who held Iowa State to 49 points the round before. And Pitt is a decent defensive team. Yeah, I think, if I was forced to make a decision now, I would take Xavier plus the points. Because like you said, Texas has had a little bit of an easy road. But it's so hard because Texas is such a good team coming from the Big 12, obviously, and we saw them demolish teams like Kansas twice this year. So if they're on, they're on. But Xavier has been good these first couple rounds. So again, I lean Xavier, but no official play yet.
Yeah, so this is a bet that I've already placed, and a lot of people will find that out during when I release my video for the Sweet 16. But I love Xavier. I love that we're honestly getting the strong head coaching edge here. I like that Xavier's already been tested. I like that we have shot makers down the stretch when we need them, and slowly boom. And listen, I've kind of been critical about Xavier, which is why I also faded him in against Kansas State, because they are a very thin team, right? But what I don't like about Texas, and I think this got revealed down the stretch in their last game and at certain points throughout the season, is Marcus Carr is a name in college basketball. I think if you bring up the name Marcus Carr, people say, oh, yeah, he plays for Texas. He's a point guard. They might even bring up they played at Minnesota. But this dude is one of the more volatile players that you'll ever find in college basketball. I mean, he'll have a 27-point game, follow it up with 7 points. He lays duds in there in between. And when you are going up against a team like Xavier, where I think with the pace of this game, they are going to get their buckets. I feel like they're always going to be able to do so. They might hit tired legs, I think, down the stretch. I don't think this is the spot that it would happen. And, obviously they went on a Big East run to the tournament or the championship game. So maybe that comes up. But I really do like that we're getting multiple possessions with Xavier with the +4. And I think we, again, have the head coaching edge. So I'm going to take Xavier to beat Texas here. And it's a pretty confident lay for me there in this one here.
Yeah, I can totally see it. Xavier's really good, and they're playing really good down the East last couple games. So I like it. I lean that way too.
Yeah, and as we kind of go down the list here, we have another fun matchup that I don't think a lot of people had. I actually had Illinois in the spot over Arkansas, and as far as my brackets goes, just because I thought for sure Kansas was going to lose that second round matchup. I just wasn't a believer in this year's Kansas team personally. I thought that 8-9 with Arkansas Illinois was just a tough draw period, and obviously, Arkansas played a hell of a game, finished really strong in that second half to knock off Kansas last week. And then UConn just laid the hammer on St. Mary's in the second half as well. And that's kind of been the theme with UConn in this tournament. I mean, they were trailing against Iona in the first half of that first round matchup. And then I believe they were either up one or tied with St. Mary's heading into the second half in this most recent matchup, and then ended up winning by 15. I mean, UConn has been playing with fire. I think I've had a lot of critiques about Bobby Hurley, and I don't think I don't think I'm confident in saying that they've been answered. And now you're going up against Arkansas, a really talented Arkansas team, who, if they were healthy all year, definitely has a better record, definitely a better seed. And Eric Musselman is a great tournament coach. Take me through what you're thinking about this Arkansas UConn matchup.
Yeah, it's a tough one because UConn is obviously the better offense, but we just saw Arkansas's defense step up versus Kansas, and they've been a tough defensive team all year. And like, exactly like you said, if we're betting on coaches, I'll take Musselman versus the field in March any day of the week because I love that guy and he's so fun to watch. And like I think we said in the last show too, like this he's brought them to what, three straight Sweet 16s, I think, or this is the third one. So I mean, this guy, he gets it done. He gets the job done. For the last couple of years at least. But we saw in this Razorback game versus Kansas last time, Davis stepped up huge, had 25 points. Obviously, Ricky Council, we know he's a top performer on the team. He's had 21. Yeah, I lean Arkansas. I think they can win this game again. And like you said, if you want to lean on coaching, I know obviously everybody knows obviously coaching is what it comes down to. If you can make the adjustments when you see when your team is down, or even when you're ahead, just keeping it up. If you want to put faith in a coach, the must bus is the one to put your faith in. So I like the Razorbacks here.
Absolutely agree. And I feel like this is a short line for a reason. I mean, yes, Arkansas just knocked off Kansas, so there is that maybe people look at that game and say, "Oh man, Arkansas is a real deal." But I also think people are looking at UConn's blowout margins of victory and ignoring that they only played two good halves of basketball, so far in this tournament, or at least maybe three if you give them that first half against St. Mary's, which I don't think was too bad, but they started off really slow in that one. Um, I also think the better guards are on the side of Arkansas in this game. So not only are looking at the better guards, the better coaching, and I do think Arkansas has a better style that's more conducive to tournament success as well. So I'm also on Arkansas there, and that's going to also be a bet for me as well. But let's head down to this final Sweet 16 matchup here. Then we have Gonzaga going up against UCLA. And once again, if you followed that futures video, y'all, this is a matchup that's going to make us profitable no matter what because we have futures on UCLA to the Elite Eight and Gonzaga to the Elite Eight and Gonzaga to win or go to the Final Four and win it all as well. So obviously we want Gonzaga, but a win for UCLA isn't in end the world there as well. But really fun matchup, Nick. Take me through what you're thinking there. It opened up really tight at +2 for Gonzaga.
Yeah, this is a good one. It's a rematch from a couple years ago when Gonzaga sent him packing from Jalen Suggs banking a shot in the Final Four to go to the national championship. I think Gonzaga gets it done again. We saw them have a tough matchup with TCU last night, but I think this is where UCLA is really, really going to miss Jalen Clark in this matchup. I think they've obviously they got it done versus Asheville and Northwestern, covered against them, gave them a run for their money. But I think Gonzaga's offense is going to be ready to roll. And I think I saw Timmy's interview last night. He says they don't want this team to be the one to fuck it up, and they want to keep on dancing. I hate believing in Gonzaga, but I really do think they can take advantage of missing Jalen Clark and be able to score with Timmy down low. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like this is the time that Gonzaga starts to get rolling now that we get into the second weekend, especially versus a beat up team in UCLA.
Yeah, and do we know if Adam Bona is going to be a go for this game? Because I know at some point in the season, there or heading into the tournament rather, they were saying that they were optimistic that he would be able to play down the stretch, and maybe he would just be really sore. I think even if he does play, I like Gonzaga here as well. I think that their guards are starting to play a lot better. I think UCLA is kind of running thin on depth, and although I love UCLA and coming into the tournament, if they were fully healthy, this would be my national title winner. I think now I've kind of flipped, and listen, I already have a futures bet placed on Gonzaga to win the whole thing. I do think this right now in their current state with all the health concerns out there, I think Gonzaga is the better team. So give me Gonzaga just to win it outright here on the money line with the points as well. And I'm pretty confident in that one as well. But um, yeah, that's where I would kind of lead. And yeah, I am seeing that he has been practicing, it looks like, for the past week. And it is just kind of an issue about potentially, being too sore or still too much pain there and maybe some limitations with the shoulder. So even if he does play, like I said, I don't know how effective he's going to be, and he's going to be really put to the test with Timmy down low as well there too. So that's where I kind of lean. But as we kind of look at all these Sweet 16 teams, Nick, tell me, so who do you think are the top three teams that you would list in order to win the national title if you would have to be put on the spot right now?
Oh boy, that's tough because I think you want me to do the three favorites that I think there are, or three teams that
Yeah.
I okay. If we're going in terms of favorites, I think probably the public is gonna like Bama, Houston, and it's got to be Gonzaga or UCLA, one of them. I would assume Gonzaga, but I guess maybe it is UCLA since they're favored in that matchup. So one of those two, I guess, flip a coin and pick. For me, I think in terms of value, I think Miami is one of value that I really like. I think if they can get past Houston and then face up against Xavier, Texas, that's definitely a game that I think they can win and at least move on to the Final Four. Obviously, they'll have a tough matchup for whoever comes out of there, but I'll take Miami. San Diego State has a really, I mean, it's scary trusting the Mountain West, especially this deep into the tournament. But I think this team is a little different than ones we've seen in the past. I think their offense is really good, obviously very good defensively. And then one we touched on earlier, if you want like mega value, is Princeton. I think if they can catch wind and keep on dancing with this offense, that's definitely giga value. So I think Miami personally is my favorite one. Again, just with emotionally and value wise, I think they have a chance. Obviously, they have a lot of tough games in this region, but if they can get it done, I really trust their guards, and that's what I look for in March is just really good guard play. And then they have like four guys that I think I trust with the ball in their hand.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I look for guard play and I look for the coaching because I don't think unless you're Kevin Ollie and you catch lightning in a bottle with some extremely great players, I do think that the people that the coaches that host the trophy at the oh my gosh, I am butchering that so much. Hoist the trophy at the end of
There
the
we go.
year are usually pretty darn good. And when you look at, those kind of two big qualifiers and who kind of fits that mold, I'm looking at Izzo, right? I'm looking at Kelvin Sampson. I'm looking at Sean Miller, and I'm looking at whoever comes out of Gonzaga, UCLA. I think those would be the five teams that I would be eyeing. And because I already have a future on Gonzaga, and this is my pick before the tournament, I still think that they are the ones that I think will win the title. And if they do catch a Xavier, yeah, I would have to assume they catch Xavier just based on who I think it comes out at Xavier Texas matchup. I I would still like Gonzaga there. I do think it's a really fun matchup, and I think the winner of that one would come, be the one hoisting the trophy if that was the Final Four between Xavier and Gonzaga. But those would be my two teams to lean on. And when you do look at who is kind of the um, as far as value goes, Xavier's plus 4,000. I mean, there's only three teams below him: Miami, Florida Atlantic, Princeton, and that's kind of wild to me because you look at Texas, right? If they inherit Texas's line this week and they beat them, Texas is plus 1,000. So there's that big of a differential between what the Texas future for a tournament or a tournament winner is and a Xavier winner. Man, you gotta throw some money on Xavier, in my opinion, there. And I think Xavier is a better team than Houston right now as well. So in theory, if that's the next round matchup, I love that. I think Xavier versus Miami, if Miami's just clicking like that, would be a tougher one than actually Houston, believe it or not. I just think Xavier
Mhm.
is built for a win over Houston there. And that's really what it comes down to, right? Just matchups and who kind of gets the draw that might be a little bit more favorable. But yeah, man, this is gonna be so much fun. I'm really excited to see how this plays out. I think obviously if I were to choose like kind of the weaker side, I would go with the East and South as far as just like kind of like the bracket I think is the most winnable to advance out of. And I think that's maybe why a lot of people are still gonna like Bama. I don't think a lot of people from the public standpoint are looking at San Diego State as being a massive threat or one of the bigger threats on the board. Obviously, we disagree a little bit there, but yeah, man, I just think this is gonna be a really fun tournament, and I'm excited to see how it plays out.
Yeah, me too. I hope we honestly get two teams in the finals that just no one expected to be in there. Like even if it is like a Miami or something, yeah, they're a 5 seed and they're an ACC Power Five school, but I don't think anyone probably expected them to be in there versus like San Diego State from the other side or something. Just something that is fun for not just the casuals out there, but us who have been knee deep in the mud watching these teams all season. That'll be good for us. But I think this tournament is built for it. I think Yeah, it's not new for us to say that this year has been crazy all year, and that March was going to be crazy with who we see coming out. So I hope maybe this is a year that we don't have a one seed win it all, but we'll see in a couple days or a couple weeks.
Yep, I absolutely agree. And once again, y'all, I want to thank you guys for checking out today's video, and there will obviously be a lot more as well, so stay tuned for those. But in the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.